I was actually in a meeting in the basement of the building. There was a large noise, the building vibrated a little bit, and I really didn't know. I thought maybe something heavy had fallen off a truck, maybe on the truck dock or something like that. Within seconds, all the radio frequencies just lit up. Everybody started to scream and yell about an explosion, a fire, and all sorts of things.
I was serving as a recruiter in Brooklyn, and I happened to be about 10 blocks away when the first plane hit. Spectators were just looking out and onlookers, just wondering if it was an accident.
I initially had been working in my office about 3 blocks south of the World Trade Center, and we got word from actually one of our customers in Cleveland called us to tell us they had heard news that a plane had just hit one of the towers.
When I got off the bus and my dad told me that there's been an attack in New York City, and I said, well, where? He's like, do you remember those buildings we went on? Because I'm 10 years old, I have no idea really what the World Trade Center is on. Like, yeah, he's like, those buildings are gone.
One of the things that struck me when I heard about the attacks initially was just how scary it was and how, with a lot of disbelief, things like that just aren't supposed to happen in the United States.
It was unreal to me. I mean, as a teenager, you barely understand what's going on. You'd only know that people die, right, because of that when you watch the news.
I was standing on the corner. I happened to look up and I saw the first tower burning. And I remember thinking to myself, boy, those people up there are really in serious trouble. It's terrible. And then we heard a zooming sound which appeared to come to my right, and I realized as I looked up that the sound was actually echoing off the buildings, and I turned my head to the left, and the second plane came and hit just above us. I felt the fire on my face.
The buildings were a quarter of a mile tall, and they're just a pile of steel and masonry and debris and things like that, and dust, and so not only where are the buildings, but where are the people?
I was in my car. At the time, I was teaching in the Criminal Justice Department at Monmouth University, listening to the radio, thinking, oh, this is very, devastating. This is awful. I hope everyone's okay. And then as I'm driving a little more, they started saying how maybe they don't think it was an accident.
I always say to people, if you see something or you have that feeling that just something is not right, it's probably not.
Remember, terrorism is about fear, spreading ideology. So if you believe some attack is imminent, you're always on edge. If you're on edge, then you're not paying attention to other vulnerable areas.
I think the common person needs to understand how we were involved with this, this world or this civilization before 9/11. Where did the Taliban come from? Our involvement in World War I and II.
We as a society, we came together against a common enemy. And unfortunately, the enemy within was anyone who was Muslim or who we thought were Muslim. And so people who appeared to be Muslim in our uneducated mind were being attacked.
And I remember that a few of our students were Muslim. And one of the things that our student affairs people immediately did was put together a program for the faculty and the staff and for the students for us to be able to talk and better understand a little bit more about people from the Arab countries.
There is no one singular unit in Islam. Yes, all Muslims believe in the Quran, all Muslims believe in God and the Prophet Muhammad and that, but there's different interpretations of Islam. There are many sects, and even within those sects, there are different subsects. And even people within the same sect and subsect can have a totally different interpretation.
You have to treat people like human beings, and that means on the U.S. soil and outside.
So regarding how the traumatic events such as the September 11th may affect the survivor of the events, there's numerous research evidence which have shown that people who are survivors of the September 11, they have increased PTSD symptoms and increased risk for depression and anxiety, insomnia issues, and alcoholic issues in both a short-term and long-term perspective.
In the Port Authority and in the City of New York, there's always been a lot of emphasis on safety, fire safety in structures, and especially in high-rise buildings. But afterwards, there was more focus on catastrophic events where it was more than just a fire.
9/11 was a wake-up call for a lot of us in terms of how we deal with crisis. Whether it was 9/11 or whether it's some of the shootings that have come to schools, shopping centers, we've had to learn how to be much more attentive about how we keep our employees and our faculty and our staff safe.
Yeah, I think the biggest change that came about was the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, recognized the vulnerability of the financial markets to an attack of that nature. And I believe that was one of the main reasons they moved towards electronic trading. Wasn't the only reason. There were lots of other efficiencies, but I think it gained a bit of impetus after the attacks that they recognized that perhaps having most of the trading in the country taking place in a very small area made it very vulnerable. They began the move, or accelerated the move, to decentralized trading.
So I think everything changed in how we view not just security, but how we view foreign relations, who our allies are, how to deal with our allies. So I think in that sense, everything changed.
Yeah, so information sharing is very important. I believe it's the way of the future. I believe that we are all connected through technology, through globalization. It's hard to hide information. However, it is very important to segment information. So when you look at assessing terrorism from a 9/11 perspective, you have to compartmentalize it, because if everyone is aware of everything at all times, it can be detrimental.
There are several ways people can heal or cope with traumatic events like the September 11th. Generally speaking, for PTSD or PTSD-like symptoms, exposure therapy is a very common way for people to get help and to recover from their PTSD problems. Group therapy, community-based intervention, meditation, physical activity, and medications are very common treatments for traumatic distress.
I had a lot of acquaintances who were in law enforcement who went out to the World Trade Center, to Ground Zero, to help in the aftermath. And I thank all of them for their, the service that they've given to their fellow human being, and, to just keep doing that. Just keep helping. We need a lot of help around the country, so.
Well, it was a real tragedy, for sure, and it exposed some real vulnerabilities in our country. But in some strange way, it brought us together as a country in a way that I hadn't seen before. They were kinder to one another. They were polite to one another, which is not something you associate with Manhattan quite often.
9/11 is something that will be remembered forever. And we shouldn't take for granted that we live in the greatest nation on earth. I have been fortunate enough to serve this country in so many different ways. It's the fact that we have to remember the great men and women that lost their lives, the firefighters, the police officers, soldiers, airmen, and Marines that gave their life to protect this country and to defend this country. September 11th, even if it's just remembering that day.
But it's not over for many people. There's so many issues that have come up medically. There's so many people who still don't have someone to bury because they never received their loved one's remains. So it's kind of unnerving when some people they kind of offhandedly say, it's over. It's 20 years ago. Well, it's not over.